Let's jump right into this explainer. Today, we're looking at a totally fascinating and honestly pretty provocative text from July 2011. It's written by an author named Xu Feng, and it's called The Mystery and Value of Health. Now, what makes this so interesting is that it proposes a radical, purely spiritual approach to human health and safety. We're going to unpack exactly how this author views the connection between your mind, your body, and the world around you. It's basically a complete paradigm shift, bypassing biology entirely to focus solely on the spirit.
So let me ask you a question straight from the text itself. Have you been ill recently? Or maybe you've been hurt in a car crash, bitten by a dog or a snake, or, just suddenly fell down and twisted your ankle. Think about how we normally react to these everyday accidents. If you twist your ankle, you're probably going to blame an uneven sidewalk, right? Get in a fender bender, it's the other driver's fault, or the bad weather. We're literally conditioned to look outward for the causes of our physical misfortune. But this text completely challenges that fundamental instinct head-on. And here's Xu Feng's astonishing answer. He writes, "All these things were due to the imperfection of your consciousness and soul." Wow! The text insists with absolute certainty that we should never ever blame outside factors for our illnesses or accidents. According to this philosophy, there's just no such thing as random bad luck. There is no external fault. Instead, he argues that we have to look entirely inward. Every snake bite, every twisted ankle, every single sudden illness is presented as a direct, undeniable reflection of an internal, spiritual flaw.
Section 1. The Mystery of Health, the Internal Framework.
Okay, so to understand exactly how the author connects our tangible physical reality to our internal spiritual state, we really have to look at what he calls the non-material structures of life. The text argues that beneath our physical bodies, there's this underlying invisible framework. It's like a hidden blueprint. And Xu Feng claims that all causes of disease reside entirely within this non-material structure. It operates on a super strict cause and effect loop based on your mind. The logic basically goes like this. The state of your non-material structure is dictated directly by the purity of your consciousness. If your consciousness is orderly and pure, your structure is perfect, and it literally guarantees perfect health, meaning it's impossible to get sick or face an unpredictable disaster. But on the flip side, if your consciousness is flawed, well, your structure goes wrong, and illness or disaster becomes absolutely inevitable.
Which brings us to the text's ultimate standard for human health, and it's a big one: a death without illness. The author states we've got to keep our bodies energetic so we can truly taste the sweetness of life. Because once health is lost, well, everything else kind of goes with it. But it goes way beyond just enjoying your day-to-day life. The boldest claim here is about the very end of life. Xu Feng writes that we should never suffer illness, and even when death eventually happens, we shouldn't die from a disease. We should simply pass away naturally, completely free from any sickness whatsoever.
Section 2. Tending the Soul Garden, Purifying the Consciousness.
Right, so now that we know the ultimate goal is a perfectly pure consciousness, we need to look at the how. Exactly how does Xu Feng say someone can achieve this perfect protective state of mind? Well, he outlines a really specific spiritual pathway. First, you have to take what he calls the way of the greatest creator. Second, it involves following the divine teachings of Jesus Christ and Buddha Sakyamuni, essentially blending the wisdom of these major figures into one singular path, alongside other celestial beings. But step 3 is where it gets highly visual. Xu Feng distills all of this into a central metaphor: building your soul garden. He suggests that maintaining your physical health is exactly like tending a lush garden inside your mind.
Okay, if your mind is a garden, then there are absolutely specific weeds that you've got to pull out. The text lays them out clearly: desire, greed, anger, ignorance, laziness, pride, arrogance, jealousy, envy, complaining, comparing, selfishness, and basically any pessimistic thoughts. I mean, think about how common those emotions are in our daily human experience. Yet, according to Xu Feng, these negative emotional states aren't just bad moods, they are the literal root causes of physical illness. He argues that if these weeds aren't thoroughly cleaned up and pulled from your soul garden, good health is simply impossible to maintain. Your non-material structure becomes flawed, and physical disaster is basically waiting around the corner.
Section 3. Scratching the Surface, the Rejection of Medical History.
Now, this is where we hit the boldest conceptual leap of the entire text. It is a staggering dismissal of all human medical effort. Humanity has racked its brain for millennia trying to figure out how to stay healthy. The author fully acknowledges this massive historical effort. He cites everything from ancient texts like the Ancient Emperor's Classic Internal and Xingnong's Herbal Classic, to the historical health theories of famous figures like Bianque and Huatou. He mentions Taoist healthcare, Qin Shi Huang's legendary search for life-saving elixirs, all the way up to modern Western medical science, contemporary health magazines, and traditional Chinese meridian collateral theory. He maps out this vast, misty ocean of human medical knowledge, and then he just sweeps it all right off the table.
Because, from the author's viewpoint, all medical sciences, Eastern, Western, ancient, modern, you name it, are merely scratching the surface. He argues that every pill you take, every surgery, every physical therapy is just an ineffective attempt to treat the physical symptoms of a flawed non-material structure. It's like putting a tiny Band-Aid on a massive spiritual wound. In stark contrast, he positions his way of the greatest creator as the only true method that treats the absolute root cause. By perfecting the consciousness and pulling those weeds from the soul garden, the underlying structure is fixed completely, making traditional medicine entirely unnecessary. Section 4. The Ultimate Proof, the Real-World Test.
Now, philosophy is one thing, right? But the climax of this text actually builds to a literal, real-world challenge meant to objectively prove this whole theory. The author introduces a place called the Second Home, which he also calls the New Oasis for Life. This is an actual community of his followers, who he refers to as the Lifechanyuan Celestials. Xu Feng essentially turns this community into a living, breathing testing ground. He writes that facts speak louder than words, and he wants everyone to literally see and hear the proof for themselves by observing these celestials who are actively living out this spiritual path.
And what makes this genuinely fascinating is the timeline he sets up. The author doesn't just make some vague, mystical promise for the distant future. No, in this text from July 2011, he explicitly states that over the next year and the few years following, if people just watch this community, they're going to see the proof. He literally promised that the Lifechanyuan Celestials would no longer get sick, and that anyone who was already ill would recover incredibly fast. If this happens, he argues, it will objectively prove his words are valid, proving that human beings should take this path and enter the second home as soon as possible.
Which brings us to the end of our explainer and leaves us with this lingering, highly provocative question. Did the Lifechanyuan Celestials actually remain completely free of illness? We've just explored a radical 2011 framework that claims perfect health is achieved solely by pulling the emotional weeds of anger, jealousy, and greed from our soul garden, completely dismissing thousands of years of medicine in the process. He laid out a one-year public test for the entire world to watch. It really forces us to pause and ponder the profound relationship between our minds, our physical reality, and the true nature of health. Thank you so much for diving into this fascinating source material with me. Keep asking questions and keep learning.